There is breaking news out of Moscow today. And what's embarrassing is that you're not seeing this on hardly any of the legacy medias in the mainstream medias in the United States or hardly anywhere else in Europe. But it is definitely something that warrants a great deal of attention, because Vladimir Putin has just offered a concrete peace proposal. And here's the thing about it, and we're going to get into a lot of the detail here. It's a legitimate, hardcore, true offer. And the reason why you know this is quite in sharp contrast to what's going to happen in Switzerland tomorrow is that this actually is saying, here's an offer and it's hard. And he doesn't sugarcoat it. And he doesn't say it's going to be wonderful. All you have to do is just do what I tell you and everything will be great. He talks about how hard it's going to be, and understandably that the requirements put on the Ukraine side are extremely difficult. But it also comes with a warning that if we don't accept this peace proposal, then they're going to continue to march militarily. And as I've been warning literally for months, or actually for the most of this war, the longer you wait to reach a negotiated settlement, the worse the conditions are and the worse deal you're going to get. This deal is a lot worse for Ukraine in the West than there was one in Istanbul in April of 2022. If we don't take this one, and I give almost no no, there is no chance. I'll just say that right up front. There is no chance the West will accept this. There's no chance that Volodymyr Zelensky will accept this. And the people of Ukraine are going to be the bill payers for this one too. But history is going to look back on this and say this was the last, I don't even know if you could call it golden opportunity anymore. That's probably what you could have said in April of 2022. But the last solid opportunity to have something of positive and of value for Ukraine and for the West. And ironically, Putin is offering something that does have a vestige of benefit for Ukraine and the West. I doubt we're going to take it, but let's jump into it. Let me take a look. We've got a few pieces here. We've broken it down into several different videos, and we're going to talk about the significance of them. There's also some response already from the U.S. Secretary of Defense and the NATO Secretary General. We're going to play those. Those are also very illustrative and something that we need to pay attention to. First of all, let's go to what Putin has offered. Gary, start that first video.
Ignores our interests and at the same time prohibiting Kiev from negotiating, all the time hypocritically calling us for some kind of negotiations. It just looks idiotic. First, they would give Kiev the command to lift the ban on negotiating with Russia. And secondly, we are ready to sit down at the negotiating table even tomorrow.
Okay, stop that, Gary. Okay, so what he's talking about there, in case some of you might not be aware of it, is that a year or so ago, Zelensky, in a fit of anger, actually got his parliament, the Rada, to have a law, which he then signed, that prohibits him from even having a negotiated settlement with Russia, or even even entering into negotiations with Russia, so long as Vladimir Putin is leading the country. So he has set himself up and literally put handcuffs on his own self, Zelensky has, that prohibits even talking. So obviously, that just makes a mockery of what's going to happen in Switzerland tomorrow, that somehow they're going to reach some sort of a peace settlement in the war when you don't even include the other side of the negotiation. In contrast, Putin here is pointing out the duplicity from the West, in that he is often accused of not wanting to engage in negotiations. We don't have the clip handy, but we played it before, where you have Secretary of State Blinken expressly saying, well, of course, the Ukraine's going to keep fighting because Russia doesn't want a negotiated settlement, even though they've said the opposite for a long time. Putin is here calling it out and saying, it seems odd that you're talking about one negotiated settlement when you're not willing to even talk to us, and prohibiting them from it when I'm telling you point blank, we will negotiate. And I put something on maybe 2 weeks ago where Putin said this again. The fact that he's making this emphatic plea today with more details than he ever has since 2022 should tell us something. Let's continue on with that video.
There are legitimate authorities there, even in accordance with the Constitution. And there is someone to negotiate with. Please, we are ready. Our conditions for starting such a conversation are simple. Ukrainian troops must be completely withdrawn from the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, Kherson and Zaporozhye regions. As soon as Kiev declares that it is ready for such a decision and begins a real withdrawal of troops from these regions, and also officially notifies of the abandonment of plans to join NATO, an order from our side will immediately follow to cease fire and begin negotiations.
Okay, stop right there. I wish let's see. I think I might be able to pull a map up here because I'd like to show you what he's talking about. Forgive me for just a moment. Let's see if I can find that map. I think it's this one right here. Yes, it is. Okay, so on this map here, you can see this is where all the Ukrainian sides are. This is where the Russians are up to this point. But like the Luhansk, the Donetsk, the Zaporizhia, and the Kherson provinces are obviously not all in Russian control. You see, like Zaporizhia, for example, right here. These areas are very much of this is under the occupation and still control of the Ukraine side, but there has been from the Russian side, they're saying these have been annexed and this is now Russian territory. And I think that's the part of the border is right here where you see lots of blue icons. So what Putin is now saying is that if you actually withdraw from these areas, then we are going to consider, having a negotiated settlement. So you can see that already right from the beginning that there's almost no way that the Ukraine and the Western side can agree to that because it would be literally handing territory back to Russia. So let's not sugarcoat this. This is something that is just anathema from the Western side to do. But folks, the reason why I'm talking about this so emphatically, this is a valid, legitimate possibility to reach a negotiated settlement that can save the lives of all those Ukrainian soldiers who were part of each of those blue icons I showed you. Those are all human beings right now. People who are alive today that if this settlement would go into effect would be alive tomorrow, would be alive a year from now, would be alive to continue on to rebuild Ukraine. Because what Russia is not asking Ukraine to do is to basically become demilitarized. They say they have to become denazified. I think he's going to say that here in a second, which means that he doesn't want the Zelensky regime to be in charge, or especially like some of those Azov folks that we showed you in a video a couple of days ago that are literally rightist and following the Nazi fundamentals. He wants all of those guys gone. So here's what he's going to say in a minute. Either we can negotiate this, or we can get it with military power one way or the other. Let's continue on with the video.
Today we are making another concrete, real peace proposal. If in Kiev and in the Western capitals they also refuse it, as before, then in the end it is their business, their political and moral responsibility for the continuation of bloodshed. And the conditions for starting negotiations will be different. Let me emphasize the main thing.
Also, that he just now reinforced something that I've been telling you on this channel probably as long as we've been having it. The longer we wait to make a negotiated deal, the worse the conditions get. I just said it again. Now you hear it straight from his mouth. The conditions that he's offering today, basically it's a one-time offer. If you don't take this now, the next time that we talk about negotiated settlement, it's probably going to be something closer to the terms of surrender. And they won't be as generous as they are now. Now, that also, ironically, is something similar to what John Mearsheimer said on our show just a couple of days ago, where I was asking him, if these negotiated settlements are possibilities, or if this peace process that's going to be in Switzerland, if they were at least willing to talk to Russia, if they could find a negotiated settlement. And he says he wasn't so sure that they would be willing to capitulate on the current lines. Here's what he said.
I am not sure the Russians have an interest in shutting the war down anytime soon. The Russians now have the upper hand. I think the Ukrainian army is suffering greatly on the battlefield. And I think it's only a matter of time before the Russians push the Ukrainians back in a serious way and capture more territory. And I would think from a Russian point of view, it would be desirable to conquer a lot more territory than they now control, to position themselves for the future, because the Russians cannot be sure that Ukraine and the West, even if there is a ceasefire or some sort of settlement, will be content with that settlement and won't go back on the offensive sometime in the future. So if you're playing Russia's hand and you don't trust the West, you don't trust the Ukrainians, and you think that after a ceasefire is put in place, it may again turn into a hot war, you then have a vested interest in taking as much territory as possible now when you're strong, and making sure that Ukraine is a truly dysfunctional rump state.
And so you see there, elsewhere, he specified that he was talking about all four of the oblasts that Putin is going to talk about here in just a second. So that is nearly exactly what Putin is saying right here. And so what is likely is that Putin's not stupid, and he probably knows the chances are very, very thin, if at all, that the West is going to accept this. And it's very clear what he just said in that last clip before I went to this break here, that you can accept it or you can not. He said he's fine with it, just almost like what Mearsheimer said there. And if you don't, then you're going to be responsible for the consequences that follow. What else can that mean except that he's going to continue on his operation militarily to take the land that he's now asking for a negotiated settlement for? This is so hard, folks. I get it. And I'm not minimizing it at all. I'm just saying that in the future, let's assume that I'm right and that the West does what Austin and Stoltenberg is going to say here in just a second, that no, we're not going to have this negotiated settlement. We don't want it. And so we're going to keep fighting. Now, some of these people should know better. They better know more than I do how impossible that is, and the likelihood that it's going to mean that Ukraine is going to still surrender those territories. All the things that Putin just asked for, the Russians are almost certainly going to get them through more bloodshed, through more destruction. And on that day, if people had a time machine and they could go back in time to the moment we're at right here while I'm making this recording and say, man, that deal is so good. Because just consider the reality. The reality, we talk about this all the time on this channel, that on that day, if you're going to lose all four of the oblasts that Russia is asking for today, if you're going to lose them then anyway, how much sense does it make to say, let's require the deaths of tens of thousands of more Ukrainian men instead of doing what makes hard but good sense now to keep them all alive? Either way, you're going to lose the territory. Don't miss that. No matter which path it goes, they're going to lose the territory. One is that they sacrifice tens of thousands of more people. And number two is they keep alive tens of thousands of more men that they are going to desperately need to rebuild their country on the other side of a negotiated settlement or on the other side of a surrender terms, which will be worse than what they have. So it's not even just the people that are going to be saved, but it's other terms that are going to go along with it. I believe that Putin is given an opportunity right now that he thinks there's probably a 1% chance that they're going to accept it. We absolutely should accept, because this will be so much better than what is almost certainly to come. Let's continue on with that video.
Let me emphasize the main thing. The essence of our proposal is not some kind of temporary truce or suspension of fire, as, for example, the West wants. This is not about freezing the conflict, but about its final completion. And I will say again, as soon as Kiev agrees to a similar course of events proposed today, agrees to the complete withdrawal of its troops from the DPR and LPR in the Zaporozhye and Kherson regions, and really begins this process, we are ready to begin negotiations without delaying them. I repeat, this is our principled position. Neutral, non-aligned, nuclear-free status of Ukraine, its demilitarization and denazification. New territorial realities have been recognized. The status of Crimea, Sevastopol, Donetsk, Lugansk People's Republics, Kherson and Zaporozhye regions as subjects of the Russian Federation. Naturally, this also presupposes the lifting of all Western sanctions against Russia. I believe that Russia is offering an option that will make it possible to actually end the war.
So now, again, we also have to keep it real here. Those are maximalist demands of the Russian side. And certainly it would benefit Russia to be able to take all of those things and also keep all of its men alive so that they don't sacrifice potentially tens of thousands as well. But, you know, we have to look at it from our perspective. And from our perspective, these are bad terms. I'm not equivocating there. I'm not saying anything else. Those are bad terms. Those are terms that nobody in the West would want. And realistically speaking, if somebody like President Biden I mean, if he accepted this, he might as well just be handing the presidency to Donald Trump. There's virtually no way that he would survive politically if that happened. And you could probably say for Rishi Sunak or Emmanuel Macron. I mean, almost any of them, because they have spent their whole existence of the last 2+ years saying that we're going to win, that we're going to push Russia out, that Russia can't win, etc. And then now it will all have been shown to be fiction, and probably none of them survive politically. Now, what do you think the chances are that somebody who would lose their job politically if they make a deal like that is going to make that deal? And that's just the reality of it here. But the equal reality of it is that if they don't make that deal, then there are tens of thousands of more men in Ukraine who are going to sacrifice their lives for nothing. The end result is going to be the same. And what's perverse and just makes me angry, even as I'm sitting here, is that it's quite possible that these same political leaders will be able to overcome this politically and keep going and keep their jobs, even though it comes at the cost of gallons and gallons of Ukrainian blood. It's reprehensible to me. It's disgusting. But that's just how the world has worked, and that's the reality we have to deal with here. I'm telling you this today because I want to be on the record and being unequivocal and clear that sometimes, actually it's all the time, but especially now, Western leaders, all the political leaders, and that especially means Zelensky, should do the right thing, recognize the ground truth that there is no path now or ever for Ukraine to militarily defeat Russia, to push them out. And in that regard, it is immoral to continue waging a war so that you protect your own political position. That's the truth of it. And I don't care what anybody says. I don't care if that hurts anybody's feelings. I don't care if they say, hey, that's not pro-Western, that's not pro-Ukraine. We're moving past that, folks. Don't care about pro-anything. I'm talking about, I care more about the lives of those Ukrainian men than apparently anybody in Washington, D.C. or in Kiev. They seem to care about their political positions and about saving face, whatever that may mean. Ironically, they won't save face, but they may save their position just because people seem to forget about a lot of stuff when the next crisis comes along. But that's not going to change the fact, because between them and God, this truth will remain. They'll know. And all of the family members of all of those tens of thousands of people who are still fighting there, who are anguished right now and living in fear of getting that phone call, are going to get it if we don't listen to this deal right now. And the people who have the power to act on this are not going to do the right thing. They're not doing it. They haven't done it so far. And that's just something that's is just anguishing to me. It gets worse. So there's more, and you need to hear it because it's the truth. So Putin addresses another thing that no one in the West wants to address at all, but we will.
If Europe wants to remain an independent and cultural and civilizational centers of international gravity, it needs to maintain a good relationship with Russia. And most importantly, we are ready for that.
So Putin is saying, he's recognizing, hey, what we need is to understand that when the war's over, by whatever means, Russia's still going to be here. Europe's still going to be there. Everybody's going to have to live together. It's one world. Nobody's going away. So what he's saying is it's time to get to that point now. He said, we want to get along with it. Now, because of all the things that have happened over the last really 10 years, because Russia's mentality is this is not something that happened on February 2022, but began in January and February of 2014, because from their perspective, and one of the reasons why I think in the next little piece here, let me not jump ahead, because Putin addresses the lack of authority on the part of Ukraine. But he's saying that we need to learn how to live together. So we need to get this war off the table and figure out how we're going to live together. But because of all the stuff that's happened, and especially all the sanctions, a lot of things they're never going to go back to the way they were. There's no return to the status quo ante of like January of 2022, for example, because a lot of these sanctions has forced Russia to look elsewhere. So they're closer to China. They're closer to Iran. They're closer to North Korea now militarily in all of those spheres, and economically they're closer with India, with other countries in the Asian area. So they have found new markets that are less vulnerable to all these sanctions. So they're not going to go back to that. But still, even with all that, he recognizes there is something else we have to do. We have to get along with everybody in our neighborhood, even as much animosity as there is right now. What he needs, what he wants to do, what we should want to do is avoid escalation at all cost, especially even the possibility that it could develop into nuclear weapons, because then everybody's future is ruined. Even if it doesn't go completely thermonuclear, the world will never be the same on the other side of that. And I shudder to think of what would happen beyond that if nuclear weapons are used in any capacity here. We need to prevent even getting to that point and start the process of learning how to get along. You don't have to like them. You don't have to become friends with them. You do have to learn to live together because you live on the same planet. You live in the same continent. You're going to have to figure this out. Putin is ready to do that. Next thing is here, I want to talk about Zelensky addresses an issue here, which we don't like to talk about in the West, but he's not going to let it go. Check this out.
The presidential term of the head of Ukraine, who was previously elected, has now run out. His legitimacy is no longer existent, and no tricks can be used to restore it. And it's clear that the further explanations were attempting to legitimize the coup d'etat in 2014, but the verdict exists and it's a legal fact, and it puts into question all the attempts to whitewash the current situation with the cancellation of elections in Ukraine. The current Ukrainian tradition of government started with the anti-constitutional coup of seizure of power by force that happened in 2014. So it is an armed putsch, and now the circle has closed.
So you see, from Russia's perspective, and let me make a comment here. This is not saying that I like Russia's perspective or I'm for their side. I'm not for anybody's side other than those people who are dying on both sides of the line. I'm for them, and I want them to stop dying. But each side has its point of view. So the West has its point of view, and from them, from their side, let's go back to the 2014, and what they say is, well, the people spoke, and they wanted to have a different government. They didn't want the one that had been elected that was pro-Russian in 2014. So they had an uprising, and a new government was eventually elected. And so Zelensky was, I think in 2019, the next one elected in there. He was a legal one. And then when this war started, they called martial law. And so, of course, with half your or 20% of your country occupied, you can't have elections. So as soon as it's done, he's going to have elections, but we'll keep going on further. From the West, yeah, that's fine. We're good with that. But from the Russian side, it's not that way. And listen to me. You have to at least be aware of what the other side thinks, even if you hate them. Because if you don't even know how they view things, you won't know what motivates them and why they act a certain way. If you understand their perspective, even if you don't agree with it, then you can say, all right, well, if we take this course of action, that's probably going to elicit this one from them, which we don't like. So you've got to understand where they're coming from so you can find a solution that can be at least tolerated by both sides. Nobody's going to win in this thing, but you can get to something like that's a possibility of ending the war. From the Russian perspective, what happened in 2014 was that there was a legally elected government that was pro-Russian that the West didn't like and fomented a uprising. And then when it happened, supported that. And we know for an absolute fact, I've shown it on this channel with Victoria Nuland and several other American officials, actively supported the plotters and the people who uprose and overthrew the legally elected government and drove out the country. If you want to say the people spoke, that's called an election. It's not called a military uprising where the legally elected leaders are driven out. We're supposed to be against that, but that's a separate issue. We'll let the people determine that. But from Russia's position, that was an outright coup in 2014. And now then they see that the guy who was elected in 2019 and his term expired is just going to stay in power. And according to the Ukrainian constitution, according to the Russian interpretation of it, there is no provision for not having an election. And as of the deal that was signed yesterday between the United States and Ukraine, they're talking about this 10-year plan No one said anything about when an election's going to be held. And if you're thinking that this war is going to continue on for years, you seem to be saying we're going to allow the guy who was not elected, who has served his term and now who has the power to determine whether there's elections or not, is choosing to just not have an election, and I'm going to stay in power indefinitely. That's not a good definition of democracy. So if we want to claim it's democracy and yet you see nakedly it's not, because he has incentive and the power to avoid an election and just stay in power. That sounds more like authoritarian than it does a democratic leader. But each side is going to take its own interpretation, whatever it wants to. But the bottom line is Russia is saying this is an existential fight for us, and we're fighting something that in their interpretation is illegal, meaning they are going to have to solve this one way or the other so that they can continue on having relations with Europe, with Ukraine, and anyone else in the region. And that shows you they are deadly, deadly serious about this. Now, I told you at the top of this that we have some comments from some officials right now after he has said this, and we're going to see that. I'm going to show you something from Secretary of Defense Austin, but before I show you what he said today, I want to show you what he said yesterday.
The Ukrainians have done a lot to fortify their defensive positions, and they're making good use of the weapons and munitions that they're being provided. And more of that will continue to flow in. And so, in my view, they'll get stronger as time progresses. They're also doing things to mobilize more people and train more people. And so the combination of those things, I think, will have a pretty substantial effect on the battlefield, but it will take some time to kind of play out. But the good news is that we have the means to continue to provide security assistance, and you'll see it continue to flow in a very meaningful way.
Okay, if Secretary of Defense Austin had said, okay, here's these things, and because of this, weapons are starting to flow and other things, here's how they're overcoming the Russian lead, because Russia is doing these things and they have these capabilities, and we can see how these capabilities will overcome these capabilities. Then I at least I would have had a little bit more respect for it, even if I disagreed on his interpretation, but he's not doing that. And that is so important. Now, to a non-military audience, people who don't know anything about the military, never served in the military, haven't fought in any wars, Secretary of Defense, it seems plausible to me. I guess he knows what he's talking about. So, okay, cool. If that means things are going to get better for Ukraine, great. We'll start to watch that on the battlefield. Not going to happen, folks, because I do have military experience. I do have combat experience, and I have actually trained people and had a war. And I can tell you very practically and fundamentally why that is complete hogwash, what he said. There's no truth to it at all, because he didn't even look at the other half of the equation. Russia continues to recruit more people every month than they lose by a large margin. They continue to expand their industrial capacity. Every month they get more and more strong. They produce more and more precision missiles, air defense interceptor missiles, artillery pieces, drones. They repair and build new armored vehicles. I mean, they have all these things humming on full gear. They just hired a new minister of defense who's from an economic and a background on how to manufacture things. So they are building more and more things, and they are not looking at near term. They're looking at medium and long term. So meaning that they're expecting the war to go on for a long time. They're hoping for an end quickly, but they're expecting it not to be that way. So, which means all of those categories I just mentioned, but you can add in rotary winged aircraft or helicopters, attack helicopters, other kinds of stuff on the battlefield with helicopters, lift, and fixed wing. They're continuing to make even advanced fighter jets. They actually have those. There's not a huge number of them, but they keep expanding them. So whatever they lose, they're in the process of replacing. Ammunition, on the other hand, especially what they're getting from both Iran and North Korea, on top of all this, you see it's just this flood of ammunition that the West can never match. Ukraine doesn't purchase nearly nothing. I think it's a paltry 3,000 shells per year, which basically means none. The West is having a hard time coming up with all the things capacity-wise, in addition to having the money to build these things, but they will never, even the best assessments from our side say that this is not going to happen on the Western side for years, plural, to come. Russia's already well beyond us, and they're also going to continue on. That's why when Austin talks about these incremental improvements on the Ukraine side, he's not talking about the mountain that's continuing to grow in the same categories on the other side. So there is no rational calculation that he can make, that he can say with any credibility to people that, yes, they're going to keep getting better and they're getting, improvements on the battlefield that are going to make it, good for them in the long term. Why they should keep fighting. All he's going to do is get more people killed. That's what he said yesterday. Now, today, here's what he said about Vladimir Putin's comments. So all the things you just saw here, here's Austin's response.
Putin has illegally occupied sovereign Ukrainian territory. He is not in any position to dictate to Ukraine what they must do to bring about a peace. I think, that's exactly the kind of behavior that we don't want to see. We don't want to see a leader of one country wake up one day and decide that he wants to erase borders and annex the territory of his neighbor. That's not the world that any of us want to live in. And so I think he is not in my view, not in a position to dictate to Ukraine what it must do to pursue peace.
Really? In your opinion, he's not in a position to dictate to it. So what Austin wants is, he doesn't want Putin to be able to dictate anything, but he does want our side to be able to dictate things to Vladimir Putin. And he does want to, Austin does want to win militarily what he can't get through negotiations, except there aren't any negotiations because we're not even willing to talk to Russia. So net, if you take a look at what Austin said, and if you take a look at what Vladimir Putin said, one side is at least offering a hard and a difficult path to a negotiated settlement and an end of war, but it's a valid path to saying it can come, even though the terms are bad for your side. Then the other side, our side, doesn't even offer a path. There is no offer on the table. There's going to be this absurd excuse of a so-called peace summit tomorrow in Switzerland that doesn't even include the other side. They're not even talking to them. They're just saying, here's the terms we would like to have. That matches what also Austin said. We had this fantasy list of, here's the way we would like to see it, to where the world that we want to see will just exist because we desire it. Who cares about Russia, what they think? We just want them to do what we tell them for no reason. We don't want to give Russia any kind of a reason to be able to say, hey, here's what we can have. Here's what your side can have. Here's what we can have so that we can live together. We don't offer anything like that. We just say it's either our way or we're going to continue fighting. And, it really makes you wonder, is there any kind of actual desire for peace? I don't know whether our leaders are genuinely, as Larry Johnson said on our show yesterday, actually delusional, meaning that they believe what they're saying. They're just so detached from reality that they're not aware of these fundamental things that I keep showing you on this channel every day. Or if they are aware of them and they just don't care and they want to keep fighting for reasons I don't know. Some have suggested perhaps we want to see Russia just get weakened. And the longer the war goes, the more Russian soldiers die. And yeah, maybe they end up getting this territory, but it'll come at a lot higher cost. Russia will lose tens of thousands more by manually taking all this territory as opposed to getting it through negotiations. So yeah, sure, that's cool. They'll lose more aircraft. They'll lose more tanks and armored personnel carriers, howitzers, etc., more ships in the Black Sea fleet, perhaps. So maybe some in the West are going, yeah, that's fine. I mean, I know that our side's not going to win. There will eventually be a negotiated settlement, but the cost will be higher for Russia. That's immoral, unethical, and really, in a large sense, illegal, because you don't even care about the Ukrainians who are going to die. If the Ukrainians are going to lose their territory, as I just said a minute ago, and it's going to happen one way or the other, why would you not want our side, the guys we're supporting, to live? Who would be willing to make that calculation? So part of me hopes that our side is delusional and not just that they're callous to human life, that they don't even care about our side as long as they think the Russians are going to be weakened. But here's a spoiler alert for you, all you guys who may think that way. Guess what? You're wrong. Russia's not going to come out weaker. Russia's going to come out stronger. They're already much better now than they were in February of 2022. Much better conventionally. They have learned how to defeat our weapons. They have learned through electronic warfare how to blunt our ATACMS, our HIMARS, our glide bombs that we use. All of those things Ukraine doesn't even use some of them now because they don't work. Our tanks now, they learn how to, where the weak spots in the armor are. They know how to attack them from the top with some of these drones and whatnot. Everything you want to look, they now know how to defeat us better. Their soldiers, conversely, are now better than ours are in high-intensity warfare. And that's not any kind of a ding on our side, really, because we haven't engaged in any of that war. No army can be as good as another army if one has never engaged in combat in high-intensity level and the other one has. And so now then you've got 2.5 years of Russia learning a lot of bad mistakes, learning things that they shouldn't have done, getting rid of a lot of people who made terrible decisions, and they've replaced them with guys who've done a good job. And now then their capacity overall is improving, and ours, we're probably watching from a distance trying to make some corrections to our way of life, but because we don't want to change too many things, we've maybe gotten incrementally better, but net, we are weaker related to Russia than we were before. The longer this goes, the bigger that imbalance probably gets. So even if you only care about our own self-interest, we need to end this war. Now, one last one I've got to show you here. And by the way, I see
Danny, just 5 minutes ago, as you can see here, Putin's peace conditions are Hitler-like, Zelensky says. Ukraine also called Putin's proposals manipulative and absurd. Just breaking.
Yeah, and so I mean, who can be surprised by that? That's the expected. That's like what we're about to see with Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO. But Zelensky is nothing if not consistent. And of course, he's going to say that he's been calling Putin Hitler from the beginning. That's why he always says he's going to come rolling across if we take it. I'll just go on record saying this right now. Probably almost certainly in the coming 2 or 3 days, you're going to see lots of headlines that this is just like Putin or just like Hitler in Czechoslovakia. Give us Czechoslovakia and you'll have peace. And then, of course, he rolled over everybody. So they're saying it's the same thing here. Hitler's going to say, Putin is going to say, give us these territories here, and then we're going to have peace. And they'll say, no, it's just like Munich. Don't do it. But here's the thing. There is a radical difference between the two. Number one, Hitler, when he did the Sudetenland and then he went into to take Czechoslovakia, etc., he didn't have to take it by military means, and he had his entire military armed force basically ready to go, and it was at that time untested because that was even before Poland. Now then, Russia has been damaged a lot by 2.5 years of war, and they have shown that they have a military that has a size enough eventually to conquer half of Ukraine, the eastern half. And that's it. Adolf Hitler actually had a massive army, air force, and navy that they had a chance to take and did the entire continent of Europe. Putin does not have that capacity. Another massive, massive difference. Understand this before you see these headlines. Know this, because they won't tell you this. Unlike 1938, both sides have nuclear weapons now. Neither side had nuclear weapons then, so nobody had a trump card. Both sides have it now. So the idea that Russia is going to roll into Western Europe is just as foolish and suicidal as if NATO countries trying to roll into Russia, because either one of those is going to trigger a nuclear response from the other. And both sides are open about saying so. So bottom line is that it's not going to happen, but that won't stop them from claiming it because they like the emotional attachment of it. That's just a free one I'm going to give you there so that you know ahead of time how to cut the knees out of that crappy argument that they are guaranteed going to use at some point here. Last one here. Let's see Jens Stoltenberg. Now, before I show you this is an interesting one. Gary and I were talking about this before we came on the air. Body language means a lot. when you've seen Jens Stoltenberg, very oftentimes he's been very kind of, peering into the camera, and he's been very confident. His body language talks about somebody who's very self-confident. Watch the body language on this and the way he talks. I literally have never seen him do this. Check this out.
This is not a proposal made in good faith, but this is a proposal that actually means that Russia should achieve their war aims by also expecting, or expecting that Ukraine should give up significantly more land than Russia has been able to occupy so far.
I mean, you don't have to be an expert to understand that when somebody folds their arms like this and they start stuttering and because they're trying to figure out what to say, and they're very unconfident about the things that he's saying. He's trying to project strength here, but I interpret his body language there and his statements as being, oh crap. He goes, because I understand that Russia has the capacity to make good on this threat. And that's the thing about this, which is, of course, one of the other ways that distinguishes this from the Hitler-like deal. Russia clearly doesn't want to go anywhere. Russia doesn't even want to go into Western Ukraine, much less into NATO, where they know, and Putin has overtly said, we don't have the capacity to go toe-to-toe with NATO on a conventional path. And he also knows that NATO nuclear weapons would trump any attempt that he made if he did have some fantasy about doing it. So he's not going to. What he wants to do, and I think he said elsewhere in this negotiated, or in this conversation here, is that he wants a buffer between him and NATO. He doesn't want to conquer all of Ukraine and be on the border with NATO. That's what he's trying to avoid. So he actually desires to have space between him and NATO in Ukraine. So he wants an independent or a non-aligned, rather, Ukraine. He just doesn't want one that's militarized against him, that has the capacity to potentially launch future wars, which he also spoke about, I think, in one of the clips we showed there. He wants a negotiated deal to where Ukraine, with the power of NATO, doesn't have the ability to start another war in a few years' time. That's what he's looking for. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about this on the other side of this, looking back again from our perspective. Why I say that there's virtually no chance that people are going to agree to this today, because people are going to say, well, you can't trust him. I mean, he's going to do this, and there's no reason to think that in 5 years from now, they're going to keep going further. Now, who's going to say you should trust Vladimir Putin? I don't trust any leader. I barely trust maybe I don't even trust our own because of the things they've been saying, but I don't trust Macron. I don't trust Schultz. I don't trust Rishi Sunak. I don't trust Orban. I don't trust Vladimir Putin. I don't trust any of them. What we have to do is control the things that we can control and put provisions in place that would make it hard and painful for anybody to do anything further. We have a lot of those things. We don't have to trust Putin not to go into NATO because we have nuclear weapons and we have a 32-member alliance. We don't have to trust Putin. I don't trust him. No need to do so. What Putin's trying to build on the other side is an unequal requirement not to have to trust us, because he doesn't, which he said very clearly, which John Mearsheimer said. They don't trust us, and it's hard to blame them for some of that as well. We have not been trustworthy. And this is why I say, even talking about your adversaries, it is important to have integrity. It is important to be honest, to be saying what you mean and recognizing truth, and then whatever you say, back it up with actions. Because if your enemies don't believe you and can't trust you, then that means even if you say something that, okay, we'll have a negotiated settlement, now that they don't believe you. So now instead of getting a deal that would benefit you in certain regards, now you may not be able to get it. And we may be in that place right now. We may be paying for our sins in the past, because instead of having a negotiated settlement like with Minsk, where we said, hey, let's have this negotiated settlement in 2015 that would end that war, long before it ever started, we now know that our Western leaders, two of which were signatories on that agreement, that they didn't intend for it to be accomplished. They never intended for Ukraine to make good on it. They just wanted to buy them time to build their military up. Believe me, that's a point of faith on the Russian side. They talk about it all the time on their internal communications means. And of course, their people see that and they go, well, yeah, then why should we trust them now? That's the problem. We have such a deficit of trust on either side. It's hard to reach a negotiated settlement. But if we're going to have a peaceful world, if we're going to be able to save the lives of these Ukrainian men who are waiting for death if our leaders ignore this opportunity here, if we want a peaceful world after the war is over by whatever means, we're going to have to change the way we do business. We're going to have to start acknowledging reality, recognizing things for what they are and not just what we desire them to be. And we have to be people of our word. We have to, what we say has to be what we do. Now, there's obviously room for, subtle language and, and massaging things and putting a best face on things. That's fine. I mean, people do that all the time. You don't need to be crude or rude in what you're doing, but you can't lie. You can't live on lies and say things that are just self-evidently untrue and expect someone to trust you when you need them to. That's one of the crucial things that we need to come out of this. I pray to God we don't ever see this war escalate, whether conventionally or nuclear weapons, and that we can learn some lessons and that we can get new generations of people who recognize the catastrophic results of this terrible way to do business, and we start doing things better that make more sense and give everybody a chance to live a peaceful life. Because we're all going to keep living on this planet, folks. The Russians are going to keep living where they are, Europeans, the United States, where we're at. We're going to have to figure a way to get by, or we're going to kill each other in the process. God help us if that happens in there. That's your show for today. We're going to have a show tomorrow, actually two probably. Tomorrow, one, we're going to have the Intel deep dive Intel briefing that we were going to do this afternoon, but we ran this one instead because we thought it was more important. A lot of breaking news happening. And then we're also going to have Jacques Beau back, Colonel Jacques Beau from Switzerland, who's going to talk to specific issues about the so-called peace conference that's going to be held, the peace summit that's going to be held in Switzerland tomorrow. It's just a head shaker, but you need to know the truth. So we're going to have that for you tomorrow too. Thanks. Be sure to like and subscribe, folks. Promise you, anybody who's watched this know this kind of analysis is the stuff you don't get on any major news network. You don't even get on that many other YouTube kind of channels or these kinds of stories here. This is stuff you're only going to get here. Like and subscribe, pass this to other folks, hit that join button also so you can get some additional stuff that even people who watch this on YouTube aren't going to get, because we've got some really good stuff coming up for you next week. So thank you, and we will see you tomorrow on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.
The West ignores our interests and at the same time prohibiting Kiev from negotiating, all the time hypocritically calling us for some kind of negotiations. It just looks idiotic. First, they would give Kiev the command to lift the ban on negotiating with Russia. And secondly, we are ready to sit down at the negotiating table even tomorrow. There are legitimate authorities there, even in accordance with the Constitution. And there is someone to negotiate with. Please, we are ready. Our conditions for starting such a conversation are simple. Ukrainian troops must be completely withdrawn from the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, Kherson and Zaporozhye regions. As soon as Kiev declares that it is ready for such a decision and begins a real withdrawal of troops from these regions, and also officially notifies of the abandonment of plans to join NATO, an order from our side will immediately follow to cease fire and begin negotiations. Today we are making another concrete, real peace proposal. If in Kiev and in the Western capitals they also refuse it, as before, then in the end it is their business. Their political and moral responsibility for the continuation of bloodshed, and the conditions for starting negotiations will be different. Let me emphasize the main thing. The essence of our proposal is not some kind of temporary truce or suspension of fire, as, for example, the West wants. This is not about freezing the conflict, but about its final completion. And I will say again, as soon as Kiev agrees to a similar course of events proposed today, agrees to the complete withdrawal of its troops from the DPR and LPR in the Zaporozhye and Kherson regions, and really begins this process, we are ready to begin negotiations without delaying them. I repeat, this is our principled position. Neutral, non-aligned, nuclear-free status of Ukraine, its demilitarization and denazification. New territorial realities have been recognized. The status of Crimea, Sevastopol, Donetsk, Lugansk People's Republics, Kherson and Zaporozhye regions as subjects of the Russian Federation. Naturally, this also presupposes the lifting of all Western sanctions against Russia. I believe that Russia is offering an option that will make it possible to actually end the war.